My name's Matthew Collins. I'm the head of intelligence or research at Hope Not Hate. I'm a former member of the National Front.
My name's Robbie Mullen and I'm a former member of National Action. It was a National Socialist group which was formed in 2013, which was formed for the youth, to say. So it was a lot of young people, which eventually formed into a terrorist group.
My role now is obviously to gather intelligence and an understanding on the modern machinations of the extreme far right in this country and internationally. We had a particular focus on national action once it was made illegal in 2016. We never stopped investigating it or researching it, even though I think people had assumed that banning it had finished it. And then we sort of struck gold in April 2017. Robbie got in contact with us and said he wanted to leave National Action. And I think he came to Hope Not Hate. I mean, he's an adult, he can speak for himself, but I think he came to Hope Not Hate because he saw the fact that we'd never given up researching and reporting on National Action. And so he came to us to ask for our help to get out.
I think it was after the ban I knew that something was about to happen, someone was about to get killed or attempted to eventually. So I knew that that was coming close to happening.
So it was one of the things that Robbie said when he came to us was he didn't want anybody to die and he didn't want to kill anybody, and that gave us a fair indication of the sort of state the organisation was in.
You can see the mood changing, which I think the ban sped it up, and eventually it was getting towards where they wanted to be the terrorists.
It became an obsession for them, didn't it, really?
Yeah, for some people. Well, there'd be a lot of stick training, which was with Filipino fighting sticks, and there'd be a lot of boxing training, just one-on-one sparring, and some people used to do a bit of a knife training one-on-one with knives. That was Chris's ultimate plan for this big race war, and we'd use our skills which we'd learned fighting in a gym in Warrington for it. I think you think a lot of it's quite fantasy, and although you believe it, you still think there's the element of fantasy about it. Like, you still believe, yeah, this is never going to happen. But then when you realise how much they believe it could happen, I think that's the point.
There's a couple of pointers to it. After the Manchester bombing, the Manchester Arena bombing, Robbie had only just really started working for us, and we got a real insight, although we'd had a really good insight into the way they communicated with each other. It was quite sophisticated, but the things that they would communicate to each other, their ideas, their thoughts, it's like a group sickness that they had about violence and all other kinds of things. And then after the Manchester Arena bombing, that they went en masse to sort of ghoulishly ogle, excitedly look at people mourning and grieving and people laying flowers. They didn't go there in protest or in sympathy. They went there in empathy with the Manchester Arena bomber. And it gave you a fair idea. They did all this physical training, but if you looked at them, they're not the sort of people that could probably, fight their way out of a queue in a bus stop. And I think a lot of anti-fascists or people on the left looked at them and thought, well, they're not particularly hard. But the risk that they posed wasn't like that sort of physical risk. It was the idea about one of these people at home in their bedroom plotting and planning to kill an individual or do something like the Manchester Arena bombing. What we saw after that was just how excited they were by it. This concept they had about white jihad was an ideology about how they could convince themselves that some things are worth dying for. Your average neo-Nazi terrorist is often arrested planning or pre-planning terrorism. And I think the problem that they had was that very few Nazis are prepared to actually die, because their whole thing is about bombing and killing, etc., leads to this whole white homeland or this victory. And the white jihad thing was about actually we need to convince ourselves, spiritually or otherwise, that we can die doing terrorism. And the Jack Renshaw murder plot, you know, he wanted to die after killing an MP and a police officer. He wanted to die having done that. And that, I think that shows you how their ideas have become so advanced and so dangerous.
National Action seems to be, I thought, were like obsessed with like the murder of Joe Cox. Inside the group, was there a lot of talk around that? Were they quite inspired by that?
It was weird. There was like a week where people would talk about it, then it was just forgotten really. It was because of the publicity of it. The tweets went out and instantly by that there was a big talking point, and because it was just how easy it was for him to do it really. That's what people seen, that he was just a random weirdo, some person who never left his house, never sent a text message, how easy it was for him to just go out and do it. So I think there was the element of, if he can do it, anyone can. So I think that's what brought the MPs into light. I knew that Jack had been a little bit funny for a while, and he wanted to meet up, so I met up with him and he had something big to tell us all. And then he told us how because he was being investigated for something we didn't, like a corker, for something we didn't know at the time. And the police were harassing him as he seen it. So we wanted to get one back on the police, which was a woman police officer who was investigating him, who just happened to do his interview. But that wasn't enough, so we had to make it political. So we said that he was going to kill his local MP as well, which happened to be Rosie Cooper. So he told us about his plan to kill Rosie Cooper and then lure this police officer to him, where he could also kill her. And then he'd go outside with a fake suicide vest on and be killed by the police. You could tell by his face he was like nearly crying. And I asked him, was he serious? And he told me he was definitely doing it. Which if he wouldn't have, I never would have went through with going caught twice about it. It'd have been nothing. I would never have told Matt about it.
It was quite serious.
So
Very serious. He went to court and he explained exactly how he was going to do it. He'd planned it, how tall she was, how long it would take her to bleed out, all this kind of stuff. The police found the weapon that he bought to do it. And it was when Robbie left that meeting and came and said, okay, this is what's happened, Rosie Cooper was days away from being murdered by Jack Renshaw. The police weren't particularly happy. They told the Home Secretary that National Action was finished. Meanwhile, we had someone inside National Action. They had their own gym and office and training routine and communication networks. Like I said, it was quite a sophisticated group. So they weren't particularly happy with us when we told them, by the way, we have someone in this organisation, and by the way, he's been to a meeting where they've discussed killing an MP. So you would have thought, or we would have thought in our naivety perhaps, that the police would have been, oh, thank you very, very much. But actually they weren't particularly happy with us for it. I think their noses were put out, they were possibly a little bit humiliated. And there then began a process that they wanted the person that we had inside the group. But we'd made a promise, Hope Not Hate made a promise that we make to everyone. We won't hand you over, you know, at pain of death or pain of prison. But at pain of prison, we won't hand you over. And we said to the police, they had the knife, they had the plot, they wanted the witness. And we said, we're not handing him over to you until you give him immunity. And then, of course, it became quite clear that we'd broken the law, the 2016 Terrorism Act. You're not allowed to run moles or spies in prescribed organisations anymore. So we faced going to prison, but eventually it became quite desperate. They finally, after toing and throwing and much harassment and pressure and stress, they offered Robbie immunity from prosecution, but obviously Robbie had to admit and acknowledge he'd been a member of a terrorist organisation, and he won't be prosecuted for that. But he hasn't particularly been patted on the back for stopping an MP and a police officer being murdered. The idea was that we would run a story and we get 20,000 clicks and likes on it, and then Robbie would disappear, go back to doing what he does, and we'd break the group up. We were working on an idea where we would, because they were very, very paranoid, you know, really, really paranoid. We could see that in all their internal communications, they were really, really paranoid. So we were working on this idea that we would just make it impossible for them. Then we'd run a big story and the police would read it and go and arrest them all. But then they decided, as Robbie had forewarned, that the time was ready to start killing people. And that threw that whole thing up in the air, and obviously it changed all of our lives, my life, Robbie's life, the life of my boss, Nick Lowell's. Everything was turned on its head for nearly 2 years while we hid Robbie and tried to open these negotiations. I should also say, by the way, that Robbie carried on in National Action for months and months and months while the police were investigating. The police didn't make any arrests until September 2017, and Robbie was still inside National Action at that time. And also, just to be clear on this, these aren't people whose politics we don't like. These aren't people who stand at elections like the BNP, who we don't like and we can challenge politically. These are people who are going to prison for engaging in terrorism, preparation of terrorism, not people we're politically opposed to. We're not Nigel Farage or Nick Griffin or people with challenging and difficult views on immigration. These are people who are engaged in terrorism. It's very, very difficult. Robbie couldn't work for a long time, but eventually we was running out of money, and we said, you got to get a job. And he applied for loads of jobs. Christmas 2017, he applied for like 4 jobs, got 4 jobs. And there is this process now where you send off or you apply for a clean bill of health or whatever. But what's it called?
Background check. Yeah,
sorry, a background check. Very, very simple process. Andrew Gilligan wrote an article about this, funnily enough. And with no criminal record, his employers, he pays £10 for a background check. And each time he's been knocked back because he's listed as a terrorist. And of course, he's quite the opposite of that. So he's found it very, very difficult to get work, to get a job, to get on with his life. And he's sort of been stuck for 2 years now. But yeah, it's just important. He needs to get on with the rest of his life. And the thing to do that would be if he could just get a job and a bit of anonymity, I guess now. But he can't get a job because he's listed as a terrorist. But he's not a terrorist, is he? He's someone that was in a terrorist group, didn't kill anyone, and in fact brought it down. We don't hand out awards for that, apparently.
I think I lived in Widnes, which is 99% white. And I think I used to go and work with my brother in places like Blackburn and stuff like that in like 2009. And I was just the thought of, I don't want my town to turn out like this. I don't want it to look like that. And it was around the time Nick Griffin was elected. So you see him he was on telly a lot of the time. And you just look at it like, oh, what he's saying ain't that bad. And I think it was through that. It's a long process of, you've got the internet nowadays, haven't you? So there's a lot you can watch online, and it's quite easy to get sucked into it in a way. I made real world contact with a few other people, and then I messaged Chris Lithgow because he was from the Northwest, and then we started meeting every week from then on. Well, when we used to meet people, we'd normally meet at a train station, and one person would go and meet the new person whilst other people watched on, and they'd be searched, have the phones took off them, anything they've got on them took off them, and then we'd go and meet them. Well, we'd bring them to the main group, and we'd make them talk about why they want to get involved, and see if they fit the bill to join, which most people didn't. I'd say about 50 to 1 actually got in, because those Chris Lithgow, he didn't want the usual skinhead types, psycho types. Because there was a lot of people who met up and they were just, oh, when are we going out packy bashing and stuff like that. And it was just, we don't do that. There was a bigger picture to it. So I think it was, he wanted the more intelligent people who knew when to pick the fights, kind of. Yeah, it was strange because before I joined, you'd look at it and think, oh, there's not that many people, and not that many people want to join. But I started to run the emails, and the amount of emails that were coming in, obviously not all were genuine, there'd be a lot, but there'd be over 10,000 a week emails in from press and all that, so there was a lot of people. Don't know whatever happened to half the people who wanted to join. Because the only times it ever really physical was the Liverpool demonstrations, and when you're at a demonstration, your adrenaline's that high, you feel like you can go through anything. And there was the odd spats with other far right groups, but it never really was held big, and you never really fear for it. Because we always seen ourselves as better as everyone else on the right. So I think when you have that mentality, you think you can go through them all.
I think the other thing that he said as well is, like, when we talk about the sophistication of it, the way that they communicated was in a way that the police couldn't identify them, or that anybody couldn't see how they were communicating non-stop on these hidden forums. Their use of the internet and the use of social media was extraordinary. Even we learnt a few lessons from them. Their obsession about us, about hope not hate, their obsession about anti-fascism, their obsession about the left. And although, like he said, you know, they wanted intelligent people, politically they were very immature. They, you know, Tony Blair's not a communist, you know, but, you know, that sort of thing. And that is a thread that runs through, I think, the entire far right, that Theresa May is a cultural Marxist, or people who have never been involved in progressive or left politics often get involved in National Action, and they assume that up until the point they joined National Action, they'd been like a crypto-communist or something. It was really quite bizarre. But although they were politically immature, and I think the right in this country is politically immature, it wasn't just about Hitler towards the end. When we saw them moving towards terrorism as a real possibility, and, you know, and almost the inevitability, because when they were legal, they looked and talked and walked like terrorists and acted like terrorists. It became really inevitable that I guess that they would be terrorists. But all of the justifications they used for terrorism or moving towards terrorism weren't just about Adolf Hitler. And almost, you know, at the very end, it was like Hitler just wasn't enough for them. They was involved with Satanism in terms of looking for spirituality or justification, like things like the Order of Nine Angles, the occult. Some members in the group believing they could turn into werewolves. So there was a number of issues. But also, some of the people they looked to for inspiration weren't your usual suspects. The IRA, the INLA, in terms of cell structures and terrorism, and also their understanding of nationalism as well. National Action thought they were involved in like a national liberation struggle, as opposed to like propagating Adolf Hitler. They also looked at favourably at things like the Khmer Rouge, which which was drawn from a very, very small section of Cambodian society, because they were all ethnically the same. So it was very, very small, and they thought that perhaps having something like that and then a genocide around it was also a good idea. They looked at the Bolsheviks, who were a minority at the time of the Russian Revolution, and then led the Russian Revolution and took over. They looked at that. They looked at the Baader-Meinhof group, Red Army faction. They looked at all kinds of inspiration and ideas about justification, and it was like nothing we'd ever seen before. A lot of them were speaking to other far-right individuals in almost a foreign language. But I think the thing that's clear is that they didn't actually understand what it was they were talking about. We've been through all and everything National Action have ever written. And I think it scared a lot of people who were looking at the group saying, oh my word, there's a lot of long words here. for, sort of wimpy bedroom sort of neo-Nazis. There's a lot of long words here. And the idea that they were all university educated, well, that idea tailed off very, very quickly. About 2015, they realised they weren't going to recruit people from universities. And so a lot of it was just waffle, and the inevitability in the end was, of course, that they would just end up killing other people. And that's from what we saw internally, which is where they were heading, and tried to head in the very end.
I think the easy thing to say about nationalism, what it stood for was a free white Britain, which was free of the Jewish control, and obviously the rest white Britain, for whites only, all Jews.
What did National Action think should happen to Jewish people?
A real Holocaust, because obviously the Holocaust isn't seen as happened in the group, so it was a real Holocaust. That's what they wanted to happen.
So they didn't believe in the Holocaust?
No.
Yeah, the Holocaust didn't happen, but next time it will. You know what I mean?
Travelled quite far. I think I've got just normal ideas now.
Given the current political climate, yeah, it's no different than anybody else.
Does life feel easier now that you're not sort of carrying these sort of hate-filled ideas, I guess?
In a way, but I think it's a bit easier, yeah.
Bit of a struggle.
What would you say to young lads who feel drawn into extremist politics now?
It makes you fat. Do you want to look like this?
The last 2 years have been awful, haven't they? I've put on so much weight. No, you need to say something serious.
Leaving's the hardest thing to do. Just don't do it. But one of the things about Prevent is, what we'll do is we'll get little Jimmy and Johnny and we'll take them down to a synagogue, or we'll take them to a mosque and they can have something to eat and the world's brilliant and great. And in respect, yeah, that is quite good, but it's an ideology, It's something for people to believe in. It's not something you can just say, that's silly and that's rubbish. You have to put the work in to trip it up. You have to tackle it head on. If you are, like Robbie was in Witness or somewhere, or in London, and you're struggling, you're really, really struggling with dealing with change, the pace of change, your place in society, your part in society, someone offers you an ideology that explains everything, gives you a reason or understanding. It's very, very difficult to tell people, don't believe that ideology, believe my ideology. The only thing I would say is, with the greatest respect, Rob, if you look at all these people in the far-right groups, I'm sorry to be crude, but they just spend all their time in their bedrooms with their pants at their ankles, on their keyboards. That's what they are. Get out, get involved, enjoy life. And if you think you can challenge the far right and fascism and an ideology by just offering kids plates of food, you ain't going to win. People want a lot more. They demand a lot more.
I just think before getting involved, you should think about what you're doing properly. You should look into it a lot.
But it's also, it looked quite sexy, didn't it? The uniforms, the flags, the being naughty and scaring little old women.
Well, I think at the minute, if you look into it, depends how extreme you're looking, but it's a mess, isn't it? So yeah. I don't think any right-thinking person's going to look into that and join anything like the National Front nowadays, are they?
It'll fuck you up.
No one's thinking of that.
No. Let's hope. It'll fuck you up. Simple as that. And not in a nice way or a good way. But life is really, really challenging. And the far right's there, and it's got very, very simple, I've said this before, it's got very, very simple answers and solutions for very, very complex questions. And I think people who want to challenge it have to realise that that life is far more complex than waving flags at things. And that's why, we're not particularly sexy at Hope Not Hate, but we put a lot of time and effort and hours, dangerous times, whatever, into getting into these groups, and we've caused more trouble to them than they'll ever know about, and I'm proud of that. But we understand when we're inside, these people do believe in something. You know, they're not just completely moronic. You know, they believe in something moronic. Sucks the life out of you. Sucks the life out of your family, your friends. Any dreams or any aspirations, whether you could have ever achieved or attained them, you'll never reach them. You're just surrounded by morons.
I become a terrorist, so...
Yeah. It's basically as bad as it gets, isn't it?